Gilg J as Gilg Nerach.
Hello and welcome to this programme which is called Claare Gael. My name is Robert Cutting Carswell, Robert de Carslach.
Oh, Bobby Bob.
And this bilingual programme, which is called Claare Gael, you'll hear something of the English language, and you'll nishu clashen yes riddenach Gelg, and you'll also hear something of the Manx Gaelic, Chinyanamera, the mother tongue of Ellen Vannin, the Isle of Man. As Banach and Jurish, David Robertson, who'd formerly been based in Douglas as a revenue officer of the Crown in the 1780s, had returned to the island in 1791, and at present is casting his eye over the town of Douglas and giving his description of it. Lug lein reis ve gin deraw Lucy Westenra Caudal, dal tajamach tier jit de vene smedder. Tan fairly Seward Chelgram gus an olw van Helsing de hit chalirach, as te grain a gine cor gus fis fiancé Lucy and on Royal Arthur Homewood der wagen an olw van Helsing. We begin with words by Mona Douglas, set to music by Dave McLean, who plays piano here, and it's sung by Claire KILGALLON RBV. This is The Garden.
There's a little sheltered garden in the hollow of the hill, where the air with sweet bird music is a thrill, and the fragrant summer breeze whispers softly to the trees of the old world grace that lingers in its day. There's a rise till the garden of the hollyhocks are blue, and the honeysuckle's airy golden few. There the rambler roses blow, and the foxgloves gleam and glow, where Madonna lilies spread their sweet perfume. Where the willow branches trail and twine, in the shadows cool and grey, where the little breezes play with the ghostly swaying flowers of columbine. But the magic of the garden lieth not in tree or flower, or the rivers passing slowly hour by hour. For a lady young and fair long ago was placed on there, and her spirit seems to linger in the bough.
Ta siw geisdiach rys radio vanning stasiwn yn asiwn fy sgolder sgeliain a was dwlish Ellen Vanning. You read me the creation. And from the Mona's Isle project, the legacy of Mona Douglas, that was The Garden. And so to Douglas of 1791. On some rocks near the mouth of the harbour, says David Robertson, is an ancient fort, formerly intended for its defence, but now used as a temporary prison for criminals. Now this was Douglas Fort, a circular stone coastal fort built in perhaps the 1530s or 40s to defend the harbour against invasion. It was altered and added to on a few occasions in the 1600s and got new guns apparently at the time of the Napoleonic Wars between 1793 and 1815, so just a little after David Robertson is briefly describing it here. It was on the Pollock Rocks, somewhere in the vicinity of the present sea terminal, but it was demolished not long after 1815, perhaps between 1816 and 18. It was probably superseded anyway. I say it got new guns at the time of the Napoleonic Wars, but of course that was the time when the battery was built on Douglas Head, giving its name later to the Battery Pier, which was built just below that Douglas Head battery. The only vestige of the Douglas Fort is not to do with the building itself, but the survival of parts of Fort Street, just the name itself, which used to be a longer and winding street down, of course, to the fort. Gael and Fairly Seward, and Schaachtel la mein Fowr. And hid red doort van Helsing rum tra Henkshin and Gaelig Liverpool Street, for Henn. Vello en grij wegristen en gare eeg en graide ek. Genel doet me van mi furcht en derre van mi en agenos, maar doet me onze chelgram hem. Rem mi skriwen rish grij weg ach dra was chit, as na rouwen in a Westenra ro vai, as de gin en CLARE de Byrkveen zijn. Kjaart machare doet hij, kjaart son shigeres, share in a wel visegge fos. Fuddy na bi visegge arach, shen tammy gwi. Ach, ma vis femer, esh bi visegger ulju. As machare vai John, lig dau ko rau dut. Tau korish vier Weinrich. Ta de cholju won je Weinrich ons achtenjacht na DELIA. As houds tau korish de reijachrish na vier Weinrich ed, maar sen korish vier Weinrich ye, yes, sly elia tail. We'll take a trip to Aberystwyth now with MEREDYDD, Welsh singer and collector MEREDYDD Evans.
Mi es I ryw ddiwrnod yng nghwmni fan Wyl Jen, am dripi Aberystwyth yn yr excursion tren. Trodi di yr adarman, trodi di yr adarman. Cyrhaeddwyd Aberystwyth yn ddiogel yn y fan, mi dretia sy'n asiani gwrw coch a chan. Trodi di yr adarman, trodi di yr adarman. Fel rown I yn I gwasgu, rhywlan caddath ymlaen, I geisio'n ddigon gwylaidd gael siarad gair a sian. Tradi di yr adarman, tradi di yr adarman. Aeth allan gyda'r genad am gadael wrth fy hun, a hitha wedi'n hwyllo, fy mod yn eitha dyn. Tradi di yr adarman, tradi di yr adarman. Mi halas i'n agena di hol yr eneth wen, ond tawlodd esgusodion a chwarddodd ar fy mhen. Tradi di yr adarman, tradi di yr adarman. Aeth diwrnod yr excursion yn chwerw iawn I mi. Rown i'n dod tuag adre mor llesg am hen dad ci. Trodi di yr adarman, Trodi di ratarman.
Trip I Aberystwyth, sung by Meredith Evans. An unsuccessful trip, very unsatisfying trip by train. His young lady went off and left him for someone else, and he returned as tired out as his great-grandfather. Genelw ginst en a Fhionnghuala ed na tau de ynnw, nan or tau de ynnw. Genelw ginst dau na tau smunion. Maar sen, neo kummel fist douwen ed sa FOLCLORICA, on for the etanacht and the fair. Ball oder say chumsige magiet de mush stew jane geint getten, as bishiger. Nios as mish, frail force, shen as Sean dun on shoh, as on shoh. Venerum a chree as a wesh, as esh veneration heens dan on acht. Mahon heen te IRRSEEBLASER megatreit on, na san me, niem seilje gemaakt Dutch. Crin fair nacht nish, vrij me, for die de be put de bias ass, for die de jig mudges reiches enjach. Hugge stap bersen heen as jige armes doorte, Dr John. Tret an arrow gas, roos me wisse abi. Gouds de banje, were en grunje onsen, as genel seilje na greinje en ol toiach der dege lecher, ten ernjach tarn gis. David Robertson leads us through the Douglas of 1791. In the centre of the town is a small chapel dedicated to St. Matthew, which has little claim for the attention of a traveller. And in fact, Johnson's Guide of 1850 also describes Old St. Matthew's as an old and ungainly edifice. It offers but slender accommodation and stands in a very inconvenient situation, being almost in the centre of the only open space in Douglas. Well, the church had been built between 1708 and 1711 by Bishop Wilson as a chapel of ease to Kirkbraden, because Douglas was growing at that time. No vestige remains of Old St. Matthew's itself, but the roadway between the Albert and the Market Inn and in Douglas and what was once the north side of St. Matthew's is still called Chapel Row. The other side of St. Matthew's down to the quayside, that was the market area. An old St. Matthew's church was demolished in 1898. It and part of the marketplace was replaced with the fish market, now the Manx Legion Club, while the market hall stands opposite on Market Hill there. One of the early areas of Celtic culture identified was the Salzkammergut, the domain of salt, and a little further south in Hallstatt, all that in Austria. So that was music from that area, nothing Celtic about it, of course, but it was played by the brass ensemble IRRSEEBLASER from the salt town of Salzburg. Stasiwn yn asiwn dyn eisio o radio fanny na stasiw geisdiach rys Claare na Gael. She Robert Cutine Carl mish, Robert de Carslach.
Have you ever had tell of old Bobby Bob?
Having dismissed old St Matthew's as having little claim to the attention of a traveller, David Robertson continues, but on an eminence a little west from Douglas rises St George's Chapel, a modern edifice at once spacious and elegant. It was built by subscription, and the funds were lodged with the Right Reverend George Mason, Bishop of the diocese. George Mason was bishop from 1780 to 1783. Work on St George's, though, first started back in 1761, being built by subscription from among the wealthy merchants of Douglas. Suddenly, in 1765, the Murray family sold the regalities of the island to the British Crown, so the British government could crack down on the running trade. Now, the income of the wealthy merchants was affected because a lot of it came from the running trade, and so work on St George's stalled. Those subscriptions stopped coming in. It was eventually finished in 1781, by which time George Mason was bishop, and it's thought that the dedication was in consideration of his name, but Robertson tells us more about this. Te rubbe I edder a lawen garu, a shade of vai a co glass, as te greirut, gich, aru maya, be tror mai jint egge tre higgen tre. Gerem mi tikkel le chochianles jay, as dinch mi shende. Mar fregert, renne shine mages, gaui me glees a lauwegge, as jarne I de gamanach. Mar weet je nu vader de henne ons ne leegden egge, as doorte. Tan erenjach mai ginch dat shen, no de wel vissegge, a genel derre een trei shen. Ach, genelu verder een erenjach mai rauwre maag en aru kwart, egge de gedden maag val I guess, shen son a pechen te klei eggen erenjes, ach se nee en son te courage de maar aber weok, velu tigel nish machara John, ten aru kwart jem, as de over jino eg ne jur de chorersen stole. Me wisse stole chorerby, me wisse stole chorerby, te pert de jurkles on, as ta mi furchten der wisse giesgol taich der moedige. Vrisje vai, son te gin der aui fagen, de raumi tiggle. This is a song in Scottish Gaelic, but sung by two Irish singers here, MICHEAL Hanley and MICHEAL O'Donnell.
Urstingo, follow me, Urstingo, follow me, Urstingo, let's know all about it, not as an old Garaka, hideous, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and bow, and a colonel, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and bow, and a colonel. Vein in fetter, follow man, and vein in fetter, follow man, and lohan, and back of the man, vein, with dresser and ironing. The Marik, the Diddy, go see Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and bow, and a colonel, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and bow, and a colonel. After she got in the show, after she got in the show, after she got in the show, vein, with dresser and ironing. The Marik, the Diddy, go, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and bow, and a colonel, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and bow, and a colonel. Vein in fetter, follow man, and vein in fetter, follow man, and lohan, and back on the man, vein, with dresser and hiding. The Marik, the Diddy, go see Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and bow, and a colonel, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and bow, and a colonel. After she got in the show, after she got in the show, after she got in the show, vein, with dresser and hiding. The Marik, the Diddy, go Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and bow, and a colonel, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and bow, and a colonel. Urstingo, follow me, Urstingo, follow me, Urstingo, let's know. Have I had an artist and no Garaka, hideous, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and bow, and a colonel, Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and Ellen, the bow, and the bow, and bow, and a colonel.
And Bowen of it Fhionnghuala, and was recorded originally under the names of Michael Hanley and Michael O'Donnell, MICHEAL Hanley. It was re-released as without the drones, in fact, as part of an album where they took the name Monroe. Eish hai as fietrom chwsiach. Vau riw de stwd Cerelach, as van lior chwsiad riw lint na smoen na lior na firelia. Charawus ach de stwd treishen. Nish, tau de weinsjer, as tam I treisjel na velenage vaier beliel. Kunier machare, de wel tusje na stroge na kunjen, as nach liezigchen kor barant ons een ver sanuna. Manne weluwer reirische gleachte mai, liek dau instut, fuddy de wel een goes sjorge en inne wie nine, kor Gael de wel mi grey fuddy, je huis sim dingen as de firelia na genolju na kusnelia kor ori brebbel de wing, morten a schoened grey. Gau esch taas de mai je, genel weg, ro weg, Tammy korlige Dutch, kor schiesons recordes eerne doetene schieltenes net. Luk shoh voor die de BJ sim Dutch, de gern maak krijger kjaart as den chebbe der. Tashin ginzige vai filieel, genei vai ridin chitlien. David Robertson describes George Mason as a man whose elevation to the episcopal dignity occasioned his future misfortunes. Being raised to the mitre by the generosity of the Athol family, he devoted himself to its interests, and was easily seduced to engage with some degree of violence in promoting his Grace's well-known attempt to re-establish in the island some portion of that feudal severity which the wisdom of ages has abolished. The bishop profaned his spiritual authority by directing it against his political opponents. Bishop's Court, a mansion formerly consecrated by the venerable piety, meekness and virtue of Bishop Wilson, now emulated the Vatican. The thunders of the church shook the island. At length the civil power arose and checked episcopal presumption. By this salutary interference, the bishop's influence being weakened and his feelings injured, he soon after died, regretting his past temerity. This is a song in Cornish now by the duo AHANAN.
Hisan ros in Hungria rodin gan franketh resu gan franketh dos you and pris o broder o sos heavy gana hat rechan Estrynion den bro hag an gweithians tis a gerno yw celys ef tro pan foan en ef tro a colon a quag hei
Cornish duo AHANAN and Chris James's song Henn prys, That's the Time. And George Mason's death in 1784 was probably due to cancer rather than injured feelings. Robertson would have met people who remembered George Mason and his time as bishop. Robertson was in the island certainly in 1787, as we heard, if he wasn't himself here at the time of George Mason's episcopacy. It's not clear when exactly he did arrive to take up his duties here. Looking at A.W. Moore's diocesan history, Soda and Man, Moore says only, "The bishop, George Mason, was an easy-going man and didn't interfere with the new preachers." Now these were the Wesleyan Methodists who were making great inroads in the island. In Moore's A History of the Isle of Man, he refers to Bishop Mason as a man of no influence. Canon John Gelling's A History of the Manx Church doesn't give the details for his opinion, but he says, "Mason's personal character made him unfitted for his office." And he says later, Mason was criticised for using his spiritual position against his political opponents, as we heard Robertson say about him earlier on. Tre hug mi cúnta J. Monach and Lucy, and rid chedan as rai ach fódan a smúra agan, ve Gian trom chúsach, a gedort e weg. Gawe merish poga, onsen va imedi greinen as drugachen. Na paraphernalia aglach jen church fósach ein, mar hug e kuurt de rau, ons ver jen a lechten egge, a chully eg allu jen church leesach. Trefas yn lieditstiach on, ren Lucy Westenra altige sin. Va im neek, ach gene chwies as va mi jurkerish vedden de week. Te needjoor ons vergen a themen fieldag egge, noordige de wel purte gaur eg best en aatjemen egge hien. Ons shoh, ons steed as alles grein bi we beisoil, ta cushion regit ons zacht son orenjacht na orelje, de wel ridden, na wel persoonach G, en cachlei aglach sa nienek, as ish chwish graiacheri, te jane na wel adrashni. A tune for a dance for two, a reinlender from Norway, and the tune was possibly named for a fiddler called Ola Byrkveen, but I'm not sure. That was Professor Jon FAUKSTAD, who was an accordionist, who was playing the accordion there. Professor Jon FAUKSTAD and MUSICA FOLCLORICA NORUEGA. Siodiw stasiwn yn asiwn radio fanim. She Claare na Gael visgol sgiliau na cartnish, Merempeen, Robert Cutting Carswell, Robert a Carslach.
Have you ever had tell of old Bobby Bob?
Te began gorish yn acht yn venser ne dior, chimsach am y gyt red jori, cwdach je pert y chlinus, niaw enjachtach, odys cod o faiolg sien ynach ons ach DELIA, adi deil orish bentenrish. Me vis sio sondage, rechit, lysach sin leester os me vis sin dere pecher bi, son een drach os de egoism, son a fair, fuddy de wel vrouw na stuna son na oren egge, na te vissain Ren mi imid Jane Tusjem, Jane Chem Shaw, de fatholiach a spirit, as ren mi rail Jay nach lizachi ve merish Lucy, na smunionair a chingasek, na smooth, na vaslen femer. Renny Cordale de Hareltach, Go Hareltach de vak mi rish, lau en e dior striw de ve blio. Va van Helsingers mish lidich souske schemer Lucy. Me va grein orm tre honig mi is Jay, va boolia atchemach orm tre honig mi is Jew, the skenach. Neil Markelk. Ve gien der ouwe jurgid en ol eer as na mailen as na druntenek. With regard to George Mason and St. George's, David Robertson says, at his death there was a great deficiency of the funds which had been entrusted to his care. All was anarchy and discontent. The wealthy creditor was injured, and the industrious labourer almost ruined. Thus, St. George's Chapel, in a great measure, owes its present splendour to the distresses of many individuals, a reflection equally afflicting to the pious and humane. Well, after work on St. George's had come to a stop in 1765, it was actually recommenced in 1776 under the episcopacy of Richard Richmond, who raised funds for the work. Unfortunately, he was holding some of these funds in his personal account at the time of his death. I say unfortunately because Richard Richmond himself turned out to be personally insolvent, so £160 of this money that was for St. George's was lost to his creditors rather than going for work on the church. George Mason, it turned out, was unable to keep pace, so, as Robertson says, materials went unpaid for and workers got nothing for their labours. They put the work in and they put the materials in, but George Mason hadn't been able to keep up the subscriptions and collect the money in to pay for it all. A song now possibly recorded in New York in 1961, it's Delia Murphy, accompanied by the Kerry Band, singing about the wake in Kildare.
There's a wake, darling mother, there's a wake in Kildare. And Roger, dear Roger, oh, dear Roger is there. He's kind and he's true, and great care of me he'll take. And we'll all be back together, coming home from the wake. Coming home from the wake, coming home from the wake, and we'll all be back together, coming home from the wake. You may go, darling Nelly, to the wake in Kildare. If Roger, dear Roger, oh, if Roger, he'll be there. I know that he's true, and great care of you he'll take. And you'll all be back together, coming home from the wake. Coming home from the wake, coming home from the wake. And you'll all be back together, coming home from the wake. The road was long and twisty all the way to Gael, but Roger, dear Roger, oh, dear Roger, he was there. He was kind and he was true, and great care of her did take. And faith he told her that he loved her, coming home from the wake. Coming home from the wake, coming home from the wake. He told her that he loved her, coming home from the wake. And they sheltered from the weather, coming home from Kildare. Roger, dear Roger, oh, dear Roger, he was there. He was kind and he was true, and great care of her did take. And faith he slipped the kiss to Nelly, coming home from the wake. Coming home from the wake, coming home from the wake. He slipped the kiss to Nelly, coming home from the wake.
Well, apparently Delia Murphy had a somewhat ruder version of The Wake of Kildare, which she sang at more private gatherings, but there she was recorded, as I say, possibly in New York, possibly 1961. Whilst it seems that the difficulty with debt from the building of St George's was not entirely George Mason's fault, having inherited a deficit from his predecessor, Richard Richmond, who'd restarted the building work in 1776, it seems that perhaps George Mason was ineffective at the necessary fundraising. As we heard, he himself died in 1784. By 1788, just short of £300 was still owing for materials and work on St George's, and creditors were paid at 5%, with the debt finally being cleared in 1818. I've read that the design for what was to become St George's was taken from a church in Whitehaven. A builder was sent over from Douglas to Whitehaven to take the design from St James's, which had been built in 1752-53. Well, having seen a photograph of St James's in Whitehaven, I'd say there was a bit of poetic licence in the design of St George's, at least externally if that's the case, even allowing that St George's was extended in 1909 and upper galleries removed. Va crowd na netherneck shadow maakt de bachtel. Spiendach we, fagen, na klaasjen en taren ennelek. Henk Edin van Helsing de we kummich gurish marbel. As Henk na mollienegge go fages, de rauwet bunnes benten de geelje erskine strooinegge. Va Lucy na lai njau jeeltach. As we jean de rauw njaartek de Lord. Masaur is tamelt was nolju taastach. Esch ren van Helsing kourige dau, as heischen de rei maag as een schemer. Geleers was je nagoene Doris, ren e schul de tavi rishachadan gus a nagorus verfoslich. Esch chiarni mi de bius jachan, merish, as ren e duna Doris. My ye, as ashen, shoh aglach. En nou treden we kalt. Ne is gedden best on gennig gledden falle, de frail ginu chrie, maar is even wij. Zijn de fool we corrigi aas lau. Maar zo, us na mish. Ta mish na says na strasje allu, zijn de we mish. Es gin erlu chul. Now Breton singer Dom Duff sings about the last wolf, Blaise d'Ouessant.
Blaise d'Ouessant, zo e Blaise oveva, be de paket, barne de kruge ta deve. Tamale de wabe de uto, nunca ligu Mamko sa mehet ligu Me o hables I veza Azo e brezo veva Raso, guaso, tamalu Hableis me verland jaulu Gazda zabat so serien Hableis ginu hanifel Braso, tamale wahos Kasabere varan noas Nunca Este varandua Meo ableis divesa Azo ebreis oveva Vitose stigne de peziu La sucrogo grede Endo hik laked arsenik Astriknine no landi Tu du judas dreach wajou Ganto a bebser de harmou Voed deho hahand a gau Vit baka halloene de pao
Ach blaze du vezan, a morda all the Gerenach, the last wolf, a song in Breton by Dom Duff. Nim cor lesh nis mo fága, tamierlu. Hai mi shís na Grecian merish, as chouds vashin gol, hen crank doris a halje moer. Trerenkshin a halje moer, van inne veil cart Roslan doris. As va Arthur go kesmet de tavi stiach on. Rennis seirach gedau, as grey on sanish Jean, Jack, va mi cho neach, ren mi liai eder linjegen de skriwen, as de angesh ve orm. Now David Robertson talked of Bishop George Mason as being raised to the mitre by the generosity of the Athol family. He owed his position, in fact, to the Dowager Duchess of Athol, Lady Charlotte Murray, whose husband, the third Duke, had sold the regalities of the island to the British Crown, which was, in its way, what Robertson owed his office to as a revenue officer coming to Douglas. However, Robertson thought little of the fourth Duke's attempts to get more money for the regalities and to establish feudality as part of the manorial rights he retained. Well, there'll be more from Robertson next time, which will be the final Claare Gael before the new year, in fact. Shene, and we close with mouth music, which in this case is the name of the band rather than the Scottish Gaelic Pyrsh from which it takes its name. This is from their 1993 album MEREDYDD, featuring Gaelic singer MICHEAL Rowan singing Hey Mandu. At 7 we welcome Chris Pearson with 2 hours of the best chill-out music for your Sunday evening. Then at 9 Judith Lay will be here to present Sundown. Cartna shined on Corkion Claare Gael. Until the next time then, this is Robert Carswell, Robert a Carslach.
Oh, Bobby Bob.
Wishing you a very good night. Eve, I'm a Crieriu, as Orserlier, as my Yiri and Shedi will you.
and do